All right, good afternoon and welcome. This is Parenting During COVID-19. My name is Lauren Sabella, and this is the first session about managing anxiety. A little bit about myself. Like I said, my name is Lauren Sabella, and I am the District Behavioral Health Coach for Reading Public Schools. I wear a variety of different hats throughout the district. I support in our safety care, quality behavior supports training. I provide youth mental health first aid training for staff and parents and community members. I'm one of our Open Circle coaches as well as an Open Circle trainer. Open Circle is our social emotional curriculum for K through 5th grade. I'm also a Teapot administrator. The Teapot is a program that we use within our RISE middle school to make sure that we're using pyramid model practices. And I also do some coaching around collaborative problem solving. So that's just a little bit about me and my background. I'm also a licensed mental health counselor and a school adjustment counselor certified as well. This is my 3rd year within Reading Public Schools, and we wanted to bring more training opportunities to parents. Typically, I host in-person trainings, but obviously due to the current situations, we wanted to offer this online forum. Again, this is going to be recorded. We are currently recording now, and this will be posted to the RISE Google Classroom, as well as be posted to the RISE Facebook page. We'll also try to share it out for other ways for parents who weren't able to attend us today. If you have a question, please don't hesitate to unmute your microphone and ask. You can also raise your hand or ask it directly into the chat. I can't see the chat while we're doing the PowerPoint, so please don't think I'm ignoring. I just have to check the chat periodically to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Okay, excellent. All right, great. All right, we're going to keep going. Okay. This is the pyramid model that I referenced beforehand. The pyramid model is kind of conceptualization around how we provide supports for all of our learners at RISE Preschool. There's a slightly different pyramid model that we use for our K through 12 students, but this is the one that we use specifically for RISE. As you can see, the foundation of the pyramid is based off of nurturing and responsive relationships. That's also a part of the trainings that we provide for parents as well. So any of our parent trainings, like the one that we're doing today, is also based off of this pyramid model. You can also see from the pyramid model that it's broken down into 3 main categories. And the bottom, the largest piece, that is essentially our universal promotion for all children. So when we think about kind of our tier 1 supports, that's what we're referring to. We want to make sure that we are nurturing and providing responsive relationships for all students. And we want to make sure that we're providing a high quality, supportive environment for all learners. When it comes to meeting the needs of our students for their social emotional needs, or if we need to address some challenging behaviors that we're seeing, that's kind of our tier 2 level. So for students who may need a little extra support, we'll implement interventions that are targeted towards those specific needs around emotional supports. Tier 3 is that top tier, intensive intervention. So those would be for situations that would be more unique to the individual. So these happen less frequently or more intense. You could also see in the kind of small writing to the right, this is assessment-based intervention. So if a student needed something a little bit more than we were providing for the student, that's something that we would provide for them through careful intervention, as well as observation and other types of assessments to provide additional support. So just a little bit of background around some of the things that we do within RISE Middle School, and it's relevant to what we're talking about today, because when we're talking about anxiety, a lot of the things that we'll be talking about today will kind of be that tier 1, right? Different ways to manage anxiety, that will help the most amount of people. We'll also talk about tier 2, ways to manage anxiety that may be for a little more intense. And then tier 3, there's different levels of anxiety that become disabling or interfering with our ability to live, laugh, love, and learn. And those are kind of our really higher intense anxiety issues that we'll need other types of interventions for. Okay, I'm just going to check the chat. All right, no questions so far. And so we're going to keep going. So when we're thinking about anxiety, before we can think about how to manage it, first we have to talk about what it is. Anxiety is a normal human reaction to stressful events. Anxiety is essentially what's happening in your brain when your body is feeling a reaction to stress, dangerous, or an unfamiliar situation. Another way to explain it would be the sense of uneasiness, distress, or dread that you feel before a significant event. So I think what's most important here is to kind of reiterate that this is a normal human reaction. So this is something that everybody experiences at some point in their life. You may feel anxiety every day, and that's not abnormal. Anxiety is something that we feel even from a very young age, from birth all the way throughout adulthood. It is your body's way of trying to sense out and feel and understand what is different and what is dangerous and what is safe. Anxiety is a way for our body to test our limits and try to figure out when it is safe to proceed and when it is safe to move on. As adults, we can label and identify what anxiety is. We can say, I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling stressed. But for our little ones, this is a more abstract concept, and it's not something that our kids necessarily have the language to be able to understand. For our little ones, they can feel anxiety and they can sense anxiety, but they're not necessarily going to understand what is happening in their body or how to manage it. When that anxiety becomes overwhelming, we can certainly see behaviors from that. And that's something to kind of definitely focus in and point out. Anybody have any questions before I move on? Oh, sorry, there's somebody in the lobby. When we think about anxiety, like I said before, anxiety is something that we have all of the time. We have anxiety throughout our regular life in a response to the typical stresses that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. As parents, we naturally have stress going on in our own personal lives. We have natural stress at home. Different types of stresses may include worrying about taking care of the home, worrying about balancing schoolwork, whether that be your own personal schoolwork or schoolwork for your children. If you work either in or outside of the home, balancing that work-home life balance can be very stressful. Having to manage regular bills and finances, taking care of your own physical health, mental health, personal health and well-being, as well as balancing activities. And then just typical chores throughout the day. So being a parent in general is a very stressful thing to be constantly managing. You're responsible for yourself and you're responsible for your children. If you have a partner or a spouse, that responsibility may be shared, or depending on your situation, if you have other adults living in your home, or if you're caring for parents or elderly, you may have even more typical stresses for your everyday life. So just being mindful that anxiety is something that we're typically exposed to. A typical source of anxiety may be driving to work, getting kids' lunches ready in the morning. These are some typical stresses that we manage all of the time that we can be anxious about. We can be anxious about forgetting to hand something in or forgetting to switch over the laundry. Some of these stresses can seem minor, but they still affect our bodies in the same way. Whether the stress is something that is very minor, like forgetting to switch over the laundry, or something major, like forgetting to submit an important report at work, our body reacts the same way to stress. So when we're thinking about the typical stresses that we have, we're constantly managing this balance between stress and anxiety and calm in our everyday lives. And our kids feel that as well. Our children may not have the typical responsibilities that we have, but our kids are navigating their own social emotional regulation abilities, depending on where they're at developmentally. They may be learning basic skills like reading and writing and math. They may be learning household chores like picking up after themselves or brushing their teeth or getting dressed. There's different type of stresses, and even though they may seem different types of importance or necessity, stress still affects us all in the same way. Now, taking into account COVID-19 or the coronavirus and the pandemic that we're currently leading, on top of our typical stresses that we're experiencing, we now have this added stress of the COVID virus. We're all being affected by COVID in a different way. But even though we may be experiencing differently, it's an added stress on everyone. Some people feel that this is not a big deal and that the media is blowing it out of proportion, whereas the other extreme may feel that this is something that's truly terrifying. For anyone who has a weakened immune system or maybe a pre-existing condition that could make the coronavirus very scary for themselves or for their family, this is something that is very serious and may have us, quarantined in our homes for what has now been months at a time. In addition to the typical stresses that we've talked about in the previous slide, we now have these additional stresses that the virus has caused. Maybe due to the virus, we've lost a job or our loved ones have lost their jobs. Maybe we're fortunate enough to still have our job, but our job looks very different. And now we have to do our job from home on top of caring for our children, on top of our other needs. And that can be extremely stressful for us as well. Whether or not you've lost a job, there may be additional stresses about, again, financial pieces, whether it be a lost job or now that we're home more, we have increased bills because we are having the air on more often or the electricity is being used more often. So now our bills are going up and our income isn't. Also, how we would feed our families in going to the grocery store. I mean, going to the grocery store can be an anxiety-provoking experience now that there's longer lines and limited access, having to wear facial coverings. The entire experience is a new voucher for all of us, and having to shift so dramatically our routines can be very overwhelming. The constant worry about the virus itself and catching the virus or having a loved one catch the virus, how intense the virus may be for the individual based on age, pre-existing condition, exposure, can be very terrifying. And it's the level of anxiety or stress of understanding what could or might happen can be very overwhelming. And then finally, we have the anxiety of, how to manage. Most of us have been self-quarantine for a certain amount of time, and that self-quarantine can feel very lonely and self-isolating. It can be very hard to not reach out to extended family or reach out to friends, have socialization, and that can be very stressful for us. Parenting, like we said, is a very thankless job. It's a job that we don't get breaks from. We don't get to take vacations from. It's something that we have to take care of and manage 24/7. It's tiring. It's hard work. And and adding on the unknowns of a pandemic can be very overwhelming. When we think about the need to manage our own anxiety, it's important to remember that this current time isn't something that is going to last forever. It's important to recenter and check in and understanding that even though we can feel very alone at times, that we are not alone. I don't live in Reading, but I do work in Reading, and I've seen some of those really amazing yard signs that people have posted out of the hearts and the love and the positive messages, you know, saying you're not alone, we are in this together. Just really positive messages. And I know for me personally, those are really heartwarming to see. It's kind of a nice reminder that if you look at that first picture of everyone kind of in their isolated box online on a keyboard, it can really feel that way sometimes. It can feel like we're all isolated in our individual box and our only source of communication is technology. But I know that our communities have done such amazing things to really bring each other together, even in this stressful time. I know the high school had a really amazing parade for all of the graduating seniors, and I heard wonderful things about how inclusive the parade was and how heartwarming it was and how the whole community was able to kind of really come together and still be socially distant and respect those guidelines, and yet stand together in solidarity and show, you know, our graduating seniors how much they mean to us. And I think taking time to really be a part of those social pieces can be really important and help us really to feel not alone. That other picture about panic, you know, being really mindful about the toilet paper and the hoarding, you know, that's kind of a really, an oxymoron in itself. When the coronavirus first kind of came to be and the media was spreading awareness, it was genuinely difficult to find basic needs, basic supplies. Finding toilet paper and cleaning supplies were almost nearly impossible to find, and people were panicking and hoarding. And again, that's part of what happens when we lose our ability to kind of manage our own emotions. The anxiety of the people who felt the need to hoard things, that was their way of controlling something in an uncontrollable environment. For the people who weren't able to find their supplies, that's going to again spike their own anxiety, because the inability to be able to reach out and gain supplies can build into our own self-preservation instinct of not understanding, you know, how we're going to take care of our own family, right? How am I going to clean up my own house if I can't access paper towels and cleaning supplies? You know, I need to be able to wash clothes and wash dishes and, you know, keep ourselves safe. And understanding that, again, we are all in this together, and we need to be mindful of each other and really open up and share. Going back to that earlier point of community and responsiveness, I've seen really amazing things of people sharing resources and really starting to help out. People are making masks and donating them. People are sharing resources when stores are coming back in stock of certain things. So I definitely have seen overall improvement on the way that people are treating each other and really being positive for one another. And I think that it's important that we check in and remember the importance of being there for one another. Again, kind of that feeling of, you know, we're not alone. And even though we're apart, we're all in this together. I know I've been talking a lot about adult mental health, and I've been talking about adult anxiety. And I know a lot of us are here because we really want to know how we can help our kids. And the purpose for that is for this quote right here. So, children follow the emotional lead of their caretakers. If grown-ups are struggling, our children will know. And that's really the reason why I started off this training talking about adult anxiety and adult mental health. A lot of the times as parents, we put aside our own emotional needs, our own physical needs to take care of our children. And although that is honorable because we want to put our children's needs first, it's also important to sometimes step aside and check in with ourselves to see how we're doing. For our younger kiddos, they may not understand what the coronavirus is or what is happening, but they can see it in our faces. They can see it in our behaviors, and they can see and feel it in the tension of our homes. They may not understand why they couldn't go back to school. They may not understand why they can't go to the park. They may not understand why they can't have their friends over anymore. And that can be really hard. That can be really stressful for them. But what's additionally stressful is those underlying feelings of seeing that their parents are stressed out and seeing that their parents are feeling overwhelmed. And that's what's going to kind of give them that underlying feeling about whether or not things are okay or not. If our kids see that we're adjusting and that we're taking a deep breath and that we're feeling confident that things are okay and that things will get better, our kids will feel better. Our kids will start seeing that if our parents can be okay, we can be okay too. And that's a really hard thing to do. It's really hard to kind of tune out the media sometimes and to really focus in on ourselves because it is stressful and there are a lot of things going on. And this is a really stressful, anxiety-provoking time. But if we're able to kind of take care of ourselves and reset our own emotional needs, our kids will start feeling a lot safer within our homes, and that's a really strong point of how we can that first step towards helping our kids who are struggling with some of this anxiety. Another thing that I mentioned before is that phrase of "we're all in this together." Similar picture or similar wording is thinking about, we're all in the same storm, but everybody's in a different boat, right? So same storm, different boat. And I thought this picture was cute because personally I love dogs and I think they're very cute. But if you're thinking about, how deep is the mud, right? It depends on who you ask. So how bad is the storm? Well, it depends on what kind of boat you're in. If you are fortunate enough to still have your job, and you're not struggling financially, that is a very different boat than the people who have lost their jobs and are trying to balance finances on top of the additional stress of the coronavirus and having kids home and trying to manage their day-to-day tasks. We're all having different experiences throughout this. Maybe we still are fortunate to have our jobs, but we found that doing our job remotely from home is almost impossible to do while we have young children at home. And that can be really overwhelming. You may feel like the Labrador one day where you're only a little bit in mud, and then the very next day you may feel like that little puppy where the mud is up to your neck. And that's another thing that we want to be mindful of as well when we're kind of reflecting on our own experience as we're going through this. We may be in a good situation where we have a lot of supports and we feel fortunate that we're not struggling financially, that we're not worried about our personal health or our children's health or our elders' health, and that maybe we're able to have our groceries delivered and we have really things on top of it. But that doesn't mean that even though we're in the best of a tough situation, that some days we're just going to feel overwhelmed. Some days we're just not going to be able to cope with the stress of the unknown and the anxiety of what's happening to all of us. And that's okay to feel like that little puppy sometimes. There's no guilt in feeling overwhelmed or not being able to explain why you feel so stressed out suddenly when your situation is better than others. The purpose of this picture isn't to say, oh, I have it better or I have it worse than other people. It's more of a self-comparison within ourselves. How are we feeling in this current moment? What are the things that we need to feel okay? What are the things that we need to start pulling ourselves out of the mud? So even though we're all going through the same mud, right? We're all experiencing this pandemic of the coronavirus. We're all going to go through that differently. For some of us, we're able to kind of walk through it and keep our head above water. And for most of us, there are going to be days that it feels like we're drowning. And that's an okay thing to feel. And I think that that's really important, that we're taking the time to understand and reflect on those days that we're feeling like we're drowning. It's okay to take a mental health day. It's okay to use a vacation day. It's okay to, if you have the ability to ask a spouse or a partner or a loved one to, hey, watch the kids for a minute. I need to go cry in my room for a little bit. Feeling our emotions and feeling them as they're happening is what's going to help get us through this. We can't just wait for, the other side of the bridge. We can't just wait for this to, quote, be over. This is something that is going to take a long time until things are back to normal again. And what normal is going to depend on a lot of different things. And it's very likely that there's going to be a new normal for a long time. So what we need to do is really prioritize our own mental health so that we can continue to model and show our kids how they can start prioritizing their mental health. Another way to think about what anxiety is this cute graphic about the fish and the shark. So if we think about the difference between anxiety and fear, anxiety is the thought of something that scares us. So we see the little fish and the bubble saying, what if the big bad fish comes out today? And then your stress response from that, your brain sends out signals to release the stress response and hormones to tensen up your muscles, to elevate your heart rate, to prepare you for if that big bad fish comes out, right? Anxiety is that that pre-feeling to prep your body for something dangerous. Now, if you're that first fish that is feeling anxious, your body is going through this traumatic experience, but there's no big bad shark around him. So the anxiety fish is working themselves up when there's no actual danger around him. The difference between anxiety and fear is that for our other friend who is in the picture with the big bad shark, he's experiencing the same stress response. The difference being there's an actual predator behind him. He's in fear because he's actually in danger. So his body is doing the same things that it was doing when it was in the anxiety stage. So it may be that this fish was in deep water. And we know that when we're in deep water, we're more likely to encounter a big bad fish. So anxiety is good because it can prepare us for danger. So if that little anxiety fish is in deep water and it knows that the big bad shark is going to come out and come after it, we're prepping our body for the ability to swim away quickly. So when we get to that fear, right, that's when the anxiety switches to fear. Once we see that shark, our body is already ready. Anxiety has prepared our body for that immediate response of danger. So my heart rate has been elevated. I have blood pumped through all of my limbs. I can swim away faster. My adrenaline is rushing. My hormones are rushing. My digestion has actually stopped because When you're in that anxiety stress response, it actually stops all non-essential functions so that we can focus on the ability to get away. Now, that's when anxiety works well, right? When anxiety is prepping us for that fear response. When anxiety doesn't work so well is when we're constantly stuck in that state. What if the big bad fish comes out, but the fish never comes out, right? The shark never comes out. If that shark never comes out, if we're never actually faced with danger, then our body can get stuck in this stress response. And that's when we can actually feel physical symptoms as a result of our anxiety. And that's where a lot of times our kids aren't able to say the word, I'm feeling anxious, but that's actually where they start labeling physical responses of how they're not feeling well. And they can say to us, you know, my stomach hurts or my head hurts or I just don't feel good. And a lot of the time that can be because they've been stuck in anxiety and their body has actually reacted as a result of that. Another way to explain it is the fight or flight response. This is the human danger response. So again, when we're thinking about being confronted with stress or being confronted with danger, this is how our brain is going to react to danger. Our brain will choose either one of two results, either fight or flight. The fight or flight response changes our body physically, whether with dilated pupils, pale or flushed skin, our body may tremble, our heart starts to race. And again, the purpose of that is to get us ready to either fight or flee. So in the case of that fish and the shark, that stress is prepping our body for either running away from the shark or the ability to fight the shark. There's actually a third response that our body can use in response to this fight or flight, and that's actually fight, flight, or freeze. Freeze is a response that can happen when our body doesn't know how to react, whether that be fight or flight, and it actually starts shutting down. When we are in the freeze response, our body reacts in a different way that can sometimes look like our kids are not listening to us, that they're withdrawn, that they're not paying attention. But sometimes this can happen as a result of this fight or flight response where they're just kind of shut down. And the purpose of the shutdown response, if again, we think kind of in the animal nature world, of more almost like a possum, right? When a possum gets confronted with danger, they don't fight or flight, they freeze, right? They kind of play dead. And that's another response that our human bodies have when we're feeling that we're unable to either run away or fight. Our body kind of withdraws within itself and almost to a point disassociates so that we're not feeling present within our own bodies to be able to face whatever the danger is that we're feeling up against. Does anybody have any questions so far? You guys can put questions in the chat, or you can unmute your microphone if anyone has a question. Okay. All right, I'm going to keep going. Another way to picture anxiety is to think about an iceberg. The iceberg on the left is our traditional view of the anxiety iceberg. When we think about anxiety in itself as a behavior, we're commonly saying like, oh, they look anxious, or oh, they must be anxious, right? And we think about that top part of the iceberg. But what's important is to think about what is under the iceberg, right? What is below the water level? What is driving that anxiety? When we see a behavior that we want to label as anxiety, we're typically looking at feelings of embarrassment or disgust being overwhelmed, depressed, feeling uncomfortable, rejected, insecure, frustrated, confused. We could be experiencing grief, loneliness, or feeling tired. A lot of these built up emotions can result in the behavior of what we would traditionally see as anxiety. Now we understand that anxiety isn't so much of a behavior, but we understand anxiety as more of a feeling. So we've updated the iceberg to show that anxiety should really be in the feeling category of what is underneath the surface, because anxiety isn't really an observable behavior. People show anxiety in different ways. So when we're thinking about anxiety, there are certainly some feelings that can build up the anxiety or amplify the anxiety. But more often than not, the behavior that we're seeing is a lot more concrete. So for our kids, we're not seeing an anxious 3-year-old. Instead, we're seeing an angry 3-year-old, a defiant 4-year-old, an over-planning 5-year-old. A lot of these behaviors are things that we're seeing, and the reason for that is the underlying anxiety, right? So understanding that, what the behavior looks like, what could be driving that behavior. So thinking about the next time you're seeing some of these other behaviors, what could be driving it? This is a graphic that I thought really nicely broke down some of the ways that anxiety shows up in our children. So like we said before, one of the more common behaviors or expressions that we see when our kids are experiencing anxiety is anger. Anger is probably one of the more common things that we're seeing from our kids. And the reason for that is because anger gets a fast response. When our kids are feeling frustrated or overwhelmed or anxious about something, it's a lot easier for them to jump into that fight or flight response than it is for them to communicate what they're feeling. Communicating is hard, especially when our frontal cortex we don't have access to. The more emotional we're feeling, we actually result back to our more primitive brain, and the primitive brain is what accesses that fight or flight response. We don't have access to our frontal cortex, which is the part of our brain of deductive reasoning. So for our younger children who don't have higher cognitive ability skills to be able to plan forward about positivity and problem-solving skills, they're going to use their more reptilian brain to use fight or flight. So if they're feeling anxious about something, it's going to be much easier to either get mad or to avoid something than it is to explain to a parent or a sibling what's bothering them. Difficulty sleeping is a common one for children and adults alike. Our kids who maybe appear to be those worriers, right, who are constantly worrying about things. Difficulty sleeping kind of goes hand in hand with that. Defiance is another example of how kids can feel really overwhelmed and just kind of shut down. I think that can also be related to kind of that fight or flight, right? When the choice between the blue or the yellow cup, they're going to say they don't want either cup, right? They're going to kind of just shut down. They're not going to give a response to you, because when giving a decision, sometimes that can feel overwhelming. Lack of focus, again, that's similar to that freeze piece, right? That fight, flight, or freeze. That inability to kind of stay attentive to something when their brain is full of other thoughts of worry. Avoidance, again, is going to be a lot easier than to try to focus and be attentive on a task. So children who are trying to avoid a particular person, place, or task often are experiencing more of what it is that they're avoiding. So again, avoidance is probably the number one thing to feed anxiety. And it can be really hard, especially in this COVID world where we can be afraid of going out in public again, but we're actually feeding that anxiety by not going out in public. So it's kind of this really hard cycle where, well, we can't go out in public because we're trying to keep ourselves safe and protect ourselves. But for people who have social anxiety, or have a really hard time in public places, or just, feel more comfortable at home, this is something that's being amplified by, kind of reiterating that, oh, going out isn't safe. So staying in is safer. And the next time that we have to go out or need to go out, it's going to be really overwhelming. Over planning is another piece. We may have our kids who maybe don't have the abilities to be over planning, but these may look like that they're constantly asking the same thing over and over again. You may have told them what the plan was for the day, and they're constantly asking you to repeat it, or they forget what's next, or they need you to constantly be reassuring them what's going on next. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the over planning. And then the chandeliering is when a seemingly calm person suddenly flies off the handle for no reason. This is something that is somewhat typical for our younger kids, but again is amplified by anxiety. And it's sometimes that, we think that our kids are in a good mood and that they're doing well, and then they, just end up throwing their toys what feels like for no reason. But it could be because they had an internal dialogue or internal thoughts that just became overwhelming for them. So just kind of being mindful that a lot of these things are the ways that our kids are going to be expressing how they're feeling and what's really going on underneath. This is just a little clip that I wanted to show you, and hopefully it works. The Angst movie is something that we showed last year. I was able to get a grant to bring it to Reading, and we had a really good turnout. We had, I think, over 60 people show up from the community, and I'm hoping to bring it back again next year. It is pretty costly, but I do want to show you this little clip because I think it does a nice job kind of talking a little bit about anxiety from a young person's view. And yeah, I'm just going to, hopefully this clip works. And if you do go on the angstmovie.com website, they do have lots of resources available. But I just want to show you all this quick clip. All right, can you guys all see that? I just need to, before I hit play, I want you guys to be able to see it. Can you guys see the video? So that was just a short little video clip about the Angst movie, and I wanted to share that all with you because I think she does a nice job talking about almost what it feels like to have an anxiety attack. And I wanted to take a moment just to kind of talk about the difference between an anxiety attack and a panic attack. An anxiety attack is something that is driven from anxiety, just as it sounds. And our little ones can have this just like adults can have. And it usually has really specific triggers, and it usually builds in intensity. So it's something that, as she explained, her heart begins to race and she feels kind of like tingling in her extremities, and she kind of feels cold. Starting to have those experiences in our body can be either mild, moderate, or severe. And having an anxiety attack can be very scary because it can almost feel like a panic attack. But an anxiety attack usually has really focused stressors around what it is that really drove the reason for the attack. And it's something that is usually easily managed, or it's something that we can more likely prevent. A panic attack, on the other hand, usually occurs really unexpectedly. It's not necessarily anxiety driven. It's something that happens suddenly and can be extremely disruptive. With a panic attack, you can also have intense physical symptoms, and this is more what triggers that fight or flight response. So although sometimes we may be using these terms inadvertently, they're actually two very different things. Panic attacks can be scary because they can actually be confused with a heart attack. And I'm not a medical expert, so I'm not able to kind of differentiate between a panic attack and a heart attack, because a panic attack does have physical symptoms. But what I will say that if you are experiencing any kind of sudden or extreme distress where you're having physical symptoms, especially with your heart, that it would be recommended that you're calling 911 or that you're getting immediate medical attention, because a panic attack or a heart attack can sometimes be very different, be very difficult to differentiate between. So if you're feeling those extreme feelings, or if your kids are feeling those extreme body emotions, to not take those lightly. Anxiety attacks can also last long periods of time. They can actually be known to last hours, where a panic attack is usually more intense and shorter. So just being really mindful about the two different types of attacks, and to be really mindful that if there is any kind of physical symptoms, or if you're yourself or others are saying that your heart hurts, or those other signs of a heart attack, that you're seeking medical attention. Sorry about that. Another thing to be mindful of in how we can manage our anxieties. This is a picture of actually a CBT technique called the circle of control. As you can see in the middle is that yellow circle, and those are all of the things that we can control. This is actually something that we can do ourselves at home. It's not recommended for children under 5, but it is something that children 5 and older can actually do, and it's also can be kind of a really mindful activity. So essentially what you do is you take a piece of paper and you draw a circle, and in the middle of the circle you write down all of the things that you can control. So you can control whether or not you have a positive attitude. You can control whether or not you follow, COVID specific CDC recommendations, right? Like social distancing, wearing a facial covering if we're going out in public, washing our hands. We can control whether or not we watch the news. The news can be very anxiety provoking and focus really on negative things and really shock provoking things, and really limiting our time on social media and limiting our access to some of those news things can kind of really help manage our anxiety. We can also find fun things to do at home. Those are all things that we can control. And if we focus on the things that we can control, we focus on those things on the inner circle, we can manage a lot of our anxiety. When we start to think about things outside of our control, so things outside of the circle, like whether or not other people are following the rules of social distancing, we can start to work ourselves up again. This is where we can start really kind of spiraling into that feeling of feeling out of control and feeling that anxiety and additional stress. We can't control if others are following the rules. We can't control their actions. We can't control their motives. We can't predict what's going to happen. We don't know how long any of this will last, or whether or not there's going to be toilet paper when we get to the store. So when we're thinking about those types of things, we can really start to feel out of control, and we can really start to build on our anxiety. So if there are things that we can focus on and we can control, those are the things that we really want to start prioritizing. So for our little ones, we can also help them understand that we can control, again, our attitude, we can control our breathing, we can control washing our hands, we can control, whether or not we fight with our siblings. These are some things that we can control within our house to help us feel better and feel safe. And those are things that can really help regulate us. Another thing that's helpful when it comes to regulating and managing stress is coming up with a daily schedule. Now, I put this graphic on here but I actually don't think that this is an ideal or really realistic schedule. I just like that it's kind of broken down and it's really cleanly organized. But other than that, this is a very involved, possibly unrealistic schedule depending on what your home life looks like. But what I do like about it is kind of the key features of having some type of schedule where you're maintaining some kind of routine throughout your week. So your Monday through Friday should still have some kind of routine built in. So whatever days you are, however you start your day, you're waking up. This one just says before 9, right? So you want to make sure that you're waking up, that you're getting dressed, that you're eating breakfast. All of those things are really good. And then figuring out some way to definitely spend some time outside. We have a few weeks left of school, so you may be cutting out a few hours a day that you're participating with academic time or online time. And then the rest seems really overwhelming. Creative time, chore time, academic time, fresh air time. A lot of that is really overwhelming. I think the key points are to make sure that we have some kind of structure throughout our week, that we're making sure that we're taking breaks, that we're making sure that we're trying to get outside, and that as much as possible, we are trying to limit our screen time. Now, again, screen time can be really hard to limit, especially since a lot of our access to our academics are now remote and online, but being really mindful about how we're using our electronics and trying to take space away from that. In recent studies, it showed that even every 15 to 20 minutes, even if you're on a remote call or even if you're doing some kind of academic time, taking just even a visual break can help cut down on headaches or other types of physical constraints that we have from staring at screens. And just taking a break to stare at something about 20 feet away, just taking your eyes off of the screen and looking at something else other than a physical screen can really help your brain to reset and help minimize the likelihood of kind of getting headaches. Also taking breaks to physically get up and walk around, get a drink of water, taking bio breaks, just to kind of, again, get up and move around so that we're not stuck in a chair all day. Some things to kind of take away with you of just general anxiety management tips is to kind of reframe the idea of I'm stuck inside to I can finally focus on home and myself. Find something that you can do at home with your family, even if it's finding one positive thing each day, and reflect on it. And bringing this as a routine with your family to practice doing with your kids can really help shift that positive mind thinking to kind of understanding, again, what's in your control. Staying close to your normal routine as much as possible. Avoid obsessing over endless corona coverage. Like we said before, finding that healthy tech life balance. Finding time to go outside. Practicing good sleep hygiene. Part of good sleep hygiene is sleeping in a cool, comfortable room, making sure that it's dark, not too many lights, and minimizing electronics or screen time at least 1 hour before going to bed. Those are some good tips on good sleep hygiene so that we're all getting good sleep even in this stressful time. Also, engaging in socially distant and social activities. So again, FaceTime is great. Going for walks and staying at least 6 feet apart from other people can be nice. Again, there were some really great activities. There were teddy bear hunts and different kinds of parades and other ideas where we can still feel socially connected to others, but still maintain that social distance rules. And then finally, asking for help. If we're feeling really overwhelmed or stressed out, we want to make sure that we're still reaching out to others. We still are in school for a few more weeks, so if there are things that you're struggling with, please reach out to your teachers, reach out to myself, reach out to people in your community. If you're feeling really overwhelmed or you feel that your kids are really having a hard time, there are mental health professionals who are available for telehealth or other types of services. So there are still resources available to you even in this time. Other ways that we can, again, redirect and manage our stress include writing, drawing, music, exercise, reading a book, meditating, or doing some yoga. Any kind of movement or, kind of moving around or trying something new can be really helpful to aid in the stress management of this time. And that's it for my presentation today. I want to thank you all for participating. Again, this has been recorded and it will be posted. If you guys have any individual questions for me, I will stop recording and you can certainly ask them. So I want you to still have that space available. And this recorded session will be posted online. And then these are some of the resources. I will also try to post this PowerPoint so that you guys have access to it as well. Okay, and I am stopping the recording. Stop recording. Okay.